Today, we are here in a moment of unity in our state, without ill will, to say it's time to move the flag from the Capitol grounds.
This week, all over the country and right here in St. Louis, there's been a lot of talk about a flag, what it represents, and how much we still have to heal 150 years after that flag flew in battle. The Confederate flag controversy resurfaced after 9 murders motivated by race in a Charleston, South Carolina church. On Monday, South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley ordered the flag removed from state grounds. Here at home, Confederate symbols sparked protest. It's been a passionate topic on social media. It's crossed political lines, and it brings up a lot of issues that we have and will continue to examine in coming installments of Stay Tuned. But tonight, the topic is equality for our LGBT community. In studio, we have advocates, journalists, and leaders in this area. It's Pride Month, but our guests will say that doesn't mean there's not more work still to do. So stay tuned.
Stay Tuned brings together local experts, journalists, civic leaders, and regular people to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Add your voice to our conversation and you're at the table as we stay on top of current events and go deeper, bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. From the 9 network of public media, this is Stay Tuned.
Stand by 40. 15 to the roll. 45.
Let's start with a little bit of perspective, perhaps, for this conversation with our good friend. Welcome back to the show to both of our good friends. Doug Moore, reporter, St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Your beat is diversity, correct? And that encompasses a few different things, but it's certainly pertinent to tonight's topic. And A.J. Bockelman, executive director of Promo.
Correct.
I said Pride Month. Give us a little history. Why do we do Pride festivities? I think the word festivities almost goes hand in hand. Maybe it didn't have a festive start. Why this time of year?
Right. It was born out of the Stonewall riots in New York in 1969. And it went from being a march. It basically brought people out of the bars and into the streets because the police had raided this bar. So it brought rioting, and it brought people out, and it's over the years it has moved from, you know, this sort of movement of anger to movement of pride, and showing that it's okay to be gay, it's okay to be a part of the LGBT community. And so since that occurred in June, Pride Fests across the country are typically held during the same month.
And for those who might not know, the Stonewall riots considered the beginning of the...
It was, of the movement, yeah, of the civil rights movement of the LGBT fight for equality.
So, okay, so it's, where are we today? Things have changed a lot just in the last 10 years, I would say.
Even just in the last 3 to 4 years, we've seen things move momentously, incredibly fast compared to what we've seen in other movements. Right now, as we tape this show, we're on the precipice of a possible Supreme Court decision that could allow marriage equality, yet we still lag behind in some other basic protections.
Let's stop right there. What would that mean if the Supreme Court decision comes down either way? What would you make of that? Is that a finish line? Is that a goal line that could be crossed, or is it lost some meaning in the larger picture?
I would say that it's actually it is an accomplishment. It's a mark in the movement to see marriage equality. Because if you go back even just 10 years ago, overwhelmingly in the state of Missouri, you had 72% of the population vote against marriage equality. Now, we've learned a lot in that movement. We don't talk about same-sex marriage. We don't talk about gay marriage. We know that it's just marriage. It's the same thing that our straight counterparts have. And today, yet, while we look at likely having marriage equality, and I cannot believe that we don't end up with a positive decision, because the alternative is stepping back in what we see in settled law. And effectively going forward, we still don't have basic protections. Right now, we're still going to be fighting the fight that if you are married on Sunday, you could be fired on Monday, because right now we don't have those protections throughout the state.
And I guess that's what I was trying to say there. Is it the goal line? There's so much more you would say to do. What does he mean by you could be fired on Monday?
Missouri is one of the states where there are no protections in place for those who are LGBT. So if you are gay or believed to be gay, your employer can say, I'm going to fire you, and for that reason alone.
You can't go to civil court in the state of Missouri.
You could, but there's no protection. There's no real legal recourse for you. And so that is, I believe, the sort of the next battle that we're going to see. I mean, a lot of spotlight is shined on same-sex marriage, and rightly so. I mean, that's something I think that was something that needed to be tackled. But yeah, I think now that this is out in the spotlight, it affords people such as AJ the opportunity to talk about how far we still have to go.
Is the tent perhaps bringing more people in the terms of whose equality people are fighting for? The president, I don't know if you saw this or not, but was recently interrupted by a heckler, and this person was arguing for, I believe, it was an immigration issue concerning
trans immigrants who are currently being detained. Yes, it's all over the media right now, and unfortunately, one of the things that we always talk about, we talk about LGBT, and the reality is there's a broad spectrum of individuals within the LGBT community, and oftentimes, many of those identities are not necessarily seen out there as visibly. Bisexual community is not necessarily as visible in the broader spectrum, and the trans community has been organizing for decades, but you've not seen as many people visible and active in the community, and they're building a stronger voice. And I think that's what we're going to see a lot more of.
A lot of visibility on the entertainment networks in the last 60 days or so, 30 days. Has that been good?
It depends who you ask. I think in the long run it's good. I think that you can have a debate on Caitlyn Jenner and the value of that. I mean, there's some people within the community who thought that was exploitative of her to have been sort of put out there. Is this what the trans community wants to look like? Is this an example of the community? She's only getting the attention because she's a Kardashian. She's only getting attention because she's rich. But what about everybody else, the everyday folks? And will that help put them forward?
Time and again, that's part of the cycle that we see, that a celebrity comes forth, identifies as a member of the community, there's a lot of accolades, suddenly we think that people's minds and hearts have changed. The reality is, for the trans community, there are high rates of homelessness, high rates of unemployment, a lot of challenges that are faced by the community. And so having someone who's a big, bright, shining star, while there may be some ways in which it changes some perspectives, the reality for someone who identifies as trans, it can be very difficult.
Anything on the horizon at our state legislature that gives you hope for some of the issues? You talk about the discrimination of being fired on a Monday. I mean, I know there were some things that were brought up that did not pass this past legislative session. So
my organization, PROMO, we've advocated for basic protections. This is the Missouri Non-Discrimination Act. It's been introduced every year since roughly 1998. There's some version, it's changed a little bit over the years. Add sexual orientation and gender identity to the Missouri Human Rights Statute. And over the last several years, we have seen the issue actually move. We've gotten into committees, we've gotten it voted out of committees, we actually even had a positive vote in the Senate. And in the Missouri Senate, we believe most of those votes are still there. In the Missouri House, we actually believe that we have a number of the votes there, but it's getting the political courage to actually have the vote taken and have a clean vote, because there's also an effort in the state to change the way in which you prove a case of discrimination, making it more difficult, and we have to be able to fight off that initiative, yet add basic protections based on sexual orientation and gender identity.
I don't want to ask you to be a political scientist, but I'm just curious, the kind of the conservative element of libertarianism seems to be on the rise. And do you get any response from that into the political spectrum in terms of a person's right to do what they will with their own?
I would say in Jefferson City, there's really four to five different political spectrums within the Republican Party. You have a moderate voice that I think is actually growing, but they're overshadowed by three other voices: an evangelical, a Tea Party, and a libertarian. And oftentimes those three groups band together and get the disproportionate amount of media attention, overshadowing the moderate voices. I believe that we actually have a number of Republicans. Former Senator Kevin Engler, now in the State House, he actually was one of the shepherds of the marriage amendment back in 2004, yet he stands as one of our strongest supporters for basic protections. What changed for him is that his good family friend had a son who came out of the closet. He saw the challenges that the young man went through, and now he realizes that there are challenges for the LGBT community, and he would like to help correct that.
Doug, when might we see a Supreme Court decision?
Maybe tomorrow, maybe Friday. If not, probably Monday. It's going to happen in the next, it's imminent.
Gentlemen, thank you both for your time and for giving us some perspective to start this conversation tonight. I appreciate it very much. It is, as we've said a couple of times now, Pride Month, and there are sites and evidence of that all over town. We'll give you a look. Okay, let's talk about a little bit about where we're going now that we kind of have a little bit of a foundation for where we've come from. I'll introduce my next two guests. Adria Nicole, you're an artist, you're a musician, you're a chef as well, vegan chef. And Kara Walter, secretary for Metro Trans Umbrella Group. I'm curious, when you hear the last conversation about public opinion changing, about the number of states adopting same-sex marriage, how do you feel it in your everyday lives? Tell me a little bit about, I believe you've been a part of the effort to have Missouri recognize marriages in Iowa. Do you feel on a really personal day-to-day basis, are things changing over the last 5 or 10 years?
Oh, definitely, definitely. There's more conversations happening among people that just didn't happen before, whether it's related to quote-unquote gay issues, trans issues, intersex. You know, there's all this terminology that people weren't even aware of before. So I
people
think
may be uncomfortable to try to use too, would you say?
Yeah, but I think people are not as afraid to go ahead and ask and say, you know, well, what should I say, or what does this mean? So I think that's a great thing, just that the conversations are happening, and that's got to lead to more acceptance overall. And I definitely think that we've seen that in Missouri and across the United States.
Does that resonate with you, Kara, or is it, are we missing the point in terms of the way it feels, the change, if it is indeed happening?
I feel like there's definitely change happening all the time. As was pointed out earlier, you know, passing of gay marriage would be, or I'm sorry, same-sex couplings would be fantastic, but it's not the only issue that we face.
There's some specific things we just heard too, like homelessness.
Exactly.
People, let's just take that for one instance. How does that play into this conversation?
Well, specifically from my perspective, in the trans community, there is an overwhelming number of homeless and jobless individuals, and the disproportionate amount of discrimination and violence. And so things are looking up for the community. Things are great, but things aren't perfect. There were 226 murders of trans individuals across the world last year. And suicide rates are terrifying in the trans community. For the general population, it's roughly 4.6%, according to a recent survey. For the LGBT community, it's 10 to 20%. For the trans community, it is 41% of trans individuals have attempted suicide in their life. And so, yes, we've made some great strides, but there are some huge steps we need to overcome. Some major education that needs to happen, and some major policy changes.
What did you make of the president when he was heckled, as we've been saying? The room kind of turned on that person. You would think that just politically speaking, the president would be a friend of that cause. What did you make of the overall response and maybe what you've seen afterwards?
There's been a lot of discussion about how she brought this topic up to the president. And there are a lot of people on different sides. And regardless of which side you come down on, she has a valid point. These immigrants that are in custody, trans women, they make up about 0.5%, I believe, of the inmates, but they are the victims of 40% of the sexual assault cases. So it is a major issue. Whether you believe that she handled it properly or not, it's an issue that needs to be addressed.
Of course, we talk about all the percentages of public opinion. If we're at 63% of folks, or whatever it might be, there's still a significant percentage of people who may very well be well-meaning in their own minds, and in fact be well-meaning, but that do not support same-sex marriage or marriage for all. What do you say to those folks who just don't quite feel like that this change is good for all?
They're entitled to that opinion, but it shouldn't affect my civil rights. That's really all I have. That's the end of the argument for me. You are entitled to feel however you feel. You do not have to approve of my gay love. You don't have to approve of, you know, the way anybody lives their lives, the decisions that they make, who they are, who they love. But we all have civil rights that are ours that shouldn't be negotiable. It shouldn't even be a question.
Tell me, can you update us on the status of that fight for the state of Missouri to recognize marriages in other states, same-sex?
Oh, we won that.
And then, but going forward, what will the Supreme Court decision then mean for the rest of the state, for the state of Missouri? What will that mean for, how will that change your life?
That remains to be seen. It does change things legally, and it sets a precedence for certain rights, and that there is legal protection of those rights.
We talk about different issues that impact the LGBT community differently than other folks. How does race play into this conversation in the LGBT community within itself? Are there issues there? Is there a component in that?
Oh yes.
Tell me what that looks like.
As with everywhere else, you know, there's an intersection. There's intersectionality, and as a woman, I could marry a white man today and it not be an issue. Some years ago, that wasn't the case, and that was illegal. So I can marry a white man, but I can't marry a white woman right now. So that's where that intersection plays in, and it happens across the board, especially with the trans youth and trans youth of color. All of the statistics that Kara listed, when you add people of color to that mix, the rates are even higher for all of those things. They are at risk.
Do you have any thoughts? I asked the other two about the Caitlyn Jenner and the exposure there. Good, bad, indifferent?
I think any exposure, any visibility that gets trans people into the public eye, I think that can be good. It can be handled very poorly as well, but I think Chris Hayashi, the executive director of the Transgender Law Center, said it really well, that visibility isn't always enough. You know, I mean, especially trans women of color still face, you know, these huge disproportionate rates of violence and discrimination, and yet their stories are often ignored and left unheard. And so this visibility is great, needs to expand to include everyone, because Caitlyn Jenner's story is just one story. Her story is not mine. Her story is not the same as any other trans person I know. And making sure that the public understands that we are not all Caitlyn Jenner, I think, is very important.
Some have said that the arc of the struggle for equality for the LGBT community has been much slower, and then you see this kind of rocket ship arc for the trans community. Does it feel that way to you, or is it not moving as fast as some might think?
Well, I don't know about that. Trans individuals were heavily involved in the Stonewall riots, some of the key members in that riot, and so I feel like the trans community has been involved from the very beginning, fighting for our rights.
So maybe it's a lack of awareness.
And so maybe it's exactly a lack of awareness, and so maybe, you know, we've been making a slow climb with the rest of the LGBT community, and, you know, now we're starting to get some of that visibility that is allowing us to make some real progress, but there's still plenty of work to be done.
Very good. Thank you both for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
More sights and sounds, this time from the Grove. I think maybe Kara turned a dumb question into a good answer there. So what what is the perspective that people are missing? What other information, what other sentiment, I'm not sure what the word is, but if people think that the trans community has taken off and it's all been roses just in the last couple of years, I don't know, what are some other misconceptions? What are maybe the mainstream things that we're not talking about? You turned a dumb question into a good answer once before. I'm not asking you to do it twice. I guess what I'm saying is, if that's maybe a little bit of a clueless perspective, are there other clueless perspectives that you encounter? And that opened up to the entire table.
Well, I think one of the dynamics that we've seen is that, especially for the trans community, they've been oftentimes invisible and in the background. When the 80s and we had the HIV/AIDS scare that sort of wiped through the gay male populace, you saw the trans community become invisible during that process. Yet you have incredibly high rates of HIV within the community. And in the mid to late 90s, you started to see these computer groups pop up, and people identified with one another as a way to connect, because there were oftentimes not ways for people to necessarily connect in person. And now you've seen this growth in the trans community to become allied, work together. You see groups like Metro Trans Umbrella Group happening not just here, but around the country. In all of our major cities around the state, Columbia, Springfield, Joplin, Kansas City, we have other groups like Metro Trans Umbrella Group. And they're advocating and they're putting a face to the issue. I think that's number one. That's one of the biggest challenges we have. Having people out front, like Kara, who will talk and tell their personal stories.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I do think the media has I mean, we sort of wait for those voices to come out, and then we are more comfortable talking about it, because I think, speaking as a mainstream media person, we were okay with the L and the G, and we would throw the B in for good measure because it didn't seem to really offend that many people. But the T, we were like, wait a minute, you know, and then you would have to go to your editors and try to explain what that was, and then they're like, so there weren't a lot of stories to tell, and it was hard to tell because we weren't able to find MTUG and organizations like that who were out there speaking eloquently about it and not afraid to talk to reporters who stumble and ask dumb questions. And because part of our job as reporters to become educated on a topic so that we can then convey that information. And we're seeing much more of that. So I think that's why that trajectory might be, it looks like they're just because they're getting a lot more media. I don't know that they're, the statistics that you quoted are evidence that there's still huge problems and still great disparity in that one population. So.
Do you see that? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to add, the point on visibility is great, and I think those statistics are perfect, is that the trans community, a lot of times, as unfortunate as it may be, our goal is to blend back into society so that we maybe won't be victims of these crimes and just become another statistic. And so yes, it is taking people now starting to have the courage to stand up and be vocal. People like Caitlin and Laverne Cox and Janet Mock, and all these people that are willing to stand up and have their voices heard.
Those statistics alone sound like a pretty mainstream story. What kind of column length could you get on something like that?
Well, I could stick up to the paper right now and say, I mean, they have been, you know, the fact that they devoted a specialty beat and allow me to cover the LGBT community quite extensively and prominently placed in the paper. I think any time that I can convey that this is an issue, that's a serious issue, it's affecting a lot of people, and more importantly, that the most of our readers don't know about it. It's an opportunity for us, so we get a lot of ink out of that, I think.
It could be easy to surmise that this might just be preaching to the choir of the core of the St. Louis area, and the state is obviously much larger than that, and the opinions are much more diverse than what you might find in the central corridor of our city. Where do you place the value of reaching a broader audience with the issues you're discussing tonight, with the statistics that you brought up that seem like a lot of people might be impacted by? What's the value of that broader reach?
I think there's value in preaching to the choir, because the choir has family and friends, and especially now with, you know, social networking, you see more and more people getting to these conversations with their family and their friends that might be from outside of St. Louis in an area that's not as tolerant, having these conversations and broadening horizons, opening minds to the possibility that, you know, maybe we are all the same, and maybe I just need to let people live.
I think one of the interesting dynamics I've seen that Doug touched on a little bit and Adria talked about is intersectionality. you've got so many different stories within the LGBT community that the stories that Doug is reporting on, you're talking about race, you're talking about gender. These are bigger, broader issues that encompass many populations around our region, and we're clear that we have a lot of challenges around those same issues. For the LGBT community, we're not immune to that. Are there racists within the LGBT community? Sadly, yes. Are there people that don't understand the trans issue? Yes, completely. But we're forced to have those dialogues and have more of those conversations than you necessarily see in the broader population.
Doug, AJ, Adria, Kara, thank you all for your time. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
And thanks for your input as well. So until next time, stay tuned.